Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars. You're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I hope that by the end of this video, I'll have earned the honor and privilege of your subscription. And of course, to everybody who's watching, if you enjoy this video or any of my videos, be sure to click the thumbs up button down below. That tells YouTube to promote my videos to other folks just like you with the same interests. And let's face it, the more people watching with the same interests, the more we have the potential to learn about the subject of guitar building just by reading the comments section. And of course, if you really enjoy my videos and want to help support my channel financially, you can visit eguitarplans.com or Highline Guitars merch store. There's links in the description below. And any purchase that you make on those sites is going to help support the channel so that I can build more guitars and make more videos about how I build guitars. And of course, if you want to keep it simple, you can just click that thanks button down below and leave a tip in the amount that you think is fair. Okay, so the topic for today's video is kind of an interesting one. I have to ask a question. Did you know that the radius of your fret wire never matches the radius of your fretboard, especially when you're building a multi-scale guitar neck? Now, how do we know this? Well, in truth, you can do the math. Now, don't ask me what the mathematical formula is, because it's complicated. And I'm sure that somebody out there watching would know the formula. Please, if you do, consider posting it down in the comment section down below for others to see. In fact, I'll pin your comment if you do. And that way others can see what the formula is, and then they can calculate the radius of their fret wire. There's possibly also some online calculators where you could input some of the pertinent numbers and get the result, which would be the radius of your fret wire. Again, I don't know what those links would be, so if you happen to know, post it down in the comment section below. But the reason why I know this to be true, even without doing the math, is because I can use a simple set of radius gauges to tell me that the radius of the wire never can match the radius of the fretboard on a multi-scale guitar neck. Let me kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. When we measure the radius of the fretboard, we'll use our radius gauges. And typically the way we do this is we place the radius gauge perpendicular to the center line of the guitar neck's fretboard. And we'll look to see if there's any gaps between the radius gauge as well as the fretboard. And if there's a gap, we know we have the wrong gauge measuring that radius. So we would have to turn and try a different gauge until we get a perfect match. And once we've found that perfect match, the next thing we can do is check the radius at the very top of the fret wire. Now, in the case of a traditional guitar, where all the strings are one scale length, the frets are perpendicular to the center line of the fretboard. So you would be placing the gauge right on top of the frets, perpendicular to that center line. However, on a multi-scale guitar neck, each fret is at an angle compared to the center line. And what happens is when you install a fret perpendicular to the center line, it perfectly will match the radius of that fretboard. However, as you start to turn the angle, if that were possible to do, what you end up doing is stretching out that fret wire, and that causes the fret wire to flatten. So the radius of the fret wire on a multi-scale guitar is going to be flatter than the actual radius of the fretboard. You follow what I'm saying? It's actually fairly simple. There is, however, one fret at least one fret on a multi-scale neck or fretboard that does match the radius of the fretboard, and that is the perpendicular fret. It is usually at the very middle of your fretboard. In this case, it's at the 12th fret. When you plan out a multi-scale fretboard, you can choose any fret you want to be the perpendicular fret, and that fret will be the only fret which is perpendicular to the center line of the fretboard. All the other ones will be at angles that gradually increase either to the plus or to the minus on either side of that perpendicular fret. And as they move further away from that perpendicular fret towards either the heel end or the nut end of the fretboard, the fret is further away from matching the radius of the fretboard. Now, why would this be important? Well, in simple terms, it's really not that important. Because when you measure the radius of the fret wire, say at the 1st fret or all the way at the end here at the 24th fret, the difference between the radius of that fret wire and the fretboard is so incredibly small, it can be really difficult to even see it with a radius gauge. I mean, you can see it if you look really carefully, but for the most part, it's very difficult to see it. But in this case, I have a fretboard which has a 10-inch radius, and then when I look at the radius of the fret wire, I can see that it's flatter than 10 inches. And then I can see that it's almost matching 12 inches. It's a little bit rounder than 12 inches, a little tighter than 12 inches. So I can see that it's somewhere between 10 and 12 inches, meaning it's probably closer to 11 inches. But if I were to do the math, if I were to actually plug in the pertinent numbers into a formula, it's liable to come out something like maybe 11 and an eighth or 11 and a quarter or somewhere in between. I mean, it's difficult to actually calculate that precisely. It's difficult to tell with a radius gauge what that exact radius is, but I do know that it is flatter than the radius of the fretboard. Now this becomes an issue because every single one of these frets is going to be a slightly different radius because the angle changes. That theoretically would cause an issue when it comes to leveling the frets. But in truth, it really doesn't, because we're leveling all the frets to be at the same level. That means the frets closer to the nut and closer to the heel, when we level them, we're going to be taking off more material from the ends of the fret rather than from the center. So we end up making all the frets level with one another, and they're all going to be roughly the same radius, even though when we pressed them in at the beginning or pounded them in at the beginning before leveling them, they didn't match. But the process of leveling, especially if you're using a long leveling beam, is going to make them all level. But it's interesting to note that the fret wire radius on a multi-scale guitar neck is never going to match the radius of the fretboard when it's first installed, or when they're first installed. And I think that this is an interesting subject to bring up because I've had my YouTube channel now for about 16 years, and I've published or posted over 1,000 videos on the subject of building guitars. And one thing I have learned during this whole period is that there are a lot of people out there who have a burning desire to demonstrate to the rest of the world how smart they are, which is okay. That's how we all learn. I like to call these folks the Cliff Clavins. I borrow that name from a character from the American TV show Cheers. Cliff was a postal worker who was essentially a walking biological hard drive filled with totally useless information. And anytime I post a video where I talk about any aspect of guitar building, there are always going to be people who will chime in to talk about their opinions, what they consider facts about building guitars. And sometimes it's truthful and other times it's not, but it's always interesting. And I think that this is a subject that a lot of folks are going to want to argue and discuss. It's the minutia of guitar building. And so that's why I thought I would make a video on this topic. So if you find this to be interesting, as always, please click the thumbs up button. If you don't already subscribe to my channel, click subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, visit eguitarplans.com, my Highline Guitars merch store, or click that thanks button down below and leave a tip in the amount you think is fair. And in the meantime, take care, stay safe, and I hope you'll be back for more of these interesting future guitar building videos.